right, so you guys are reading The Night Thoreau Spent in Jail. Let me out, let me out. And this play's a little weird because it's got a lot of stuff happening all at the same time. So I kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about the way that works and go through this first section of reading with you to get you started. Stage directions are going to be very important to read in this play, very important. So first of all, we'll look at the first stage directions. The stage is very minimal. Not much is on there. But in the center you have what looks like a prison cell. The front is left open facing the audience, and there are two cots in there. And then there are lots of space surrounding the jail cell. Okay, and that's going to be important because different things are going to be happening there. Now, Thoreau is going to be on one of those cots, and another man named Bailey is going to be on the other cot. Now, what's happening is this is one night in jail. Nothing spectacular happens to Thoreau while he is in jail. But what's going to happen is he's going to flash back to other moments of time in his life and in others' lives that he's just kind of thinking about the whole time. So the action of this play is actually going to come from his thoughts. Okay, so whenever you are reading through this, visualize him just sitting there thinking, and it spurs a memory. Well, they show that memory over on this side of the stage, or they show another memory over here on this side of the stage. Okay, but try not to get confused. This isn't a linear chain of events. It's very zigzaggy. So we start with a picture of an old man, Ralph Waldo Emerson. Hopefully you remember him from last unit. He's the other transcendentalist that we read. And he and Thoreau were close friends. So he's an old man now, very forgetful, bit of dementia, and he's going, who's that guy I remember again? My best friend, can't remember his name. Of course, it's Thoreau. It's interesting that it starts with that because we're going to see, I think that the writers of this play have really tried to make sure that you see a connection between what Waldo has preached his whole life, Henry David Thoreau has lived his whole life. Okay, so they're trying to make that parallel even from the beginning of the play. So we see Emerson, Waldo is what he's called in the play, remembering Thoreau on one side of the jail cell. On the other side, we have Thoreau as a boy, and his mom is getting on to him. We can see that from the very beginning. He doesn't do what his mom said. He's getting in trouble. Mom calls him David Henry. He corrects her, no, I'm Henry David, and she's just frustrated. And so every moment that we get to see is supposed to be an important moment in Thoreau's life, okay, that leads up to this crisis moment when he's in jail. We don't know yet why he's in jail. We will find out. If you read your preface, then you know that he's there because he refused to pay his taxes because he didn't believe in the war with Mexico, so he didn't want to support the government. So he chooses instead to go to jail. We'll see that later in the play. They talk about christening here. They're going lots of back and forth. Lots of talk about already nonconformity. You can see in page 5. He wants to say his alphabet backwards. He wants to change his name, say it backwards. Waldo on the other side of the stage is talking to his wife and talking about how he too realized that Thoreau always wanted to do things backwards. So you can see that. Lots of information there. Waldo then says, as if he is preaching, cast conformity behind you. And that's going to be kind of a motif throughout this play. Ralph Waldo Emerson will be preaching something, some transcendentalist thought, because he was a very public figure, while you see Henry David Thoreau actually living that out. Okay, so Emerson as the mouthpiece, Thoreau as the hands and the feet, actually, of those thoughts. Okay. So while Waldo is talking about cast conformity behind you, we have Thoreau in prison because he wouldn't conform. Also, the issue with him and his mom, where he won't even do what mom says. Okay. We also see there that he's not conforming with Harvard, refuses to pay for his diploma, goes through all of college. All he has to do is pay $1. This is on page 7, to get his Harvard degree, and he refuses. Nah, I'm not going to pay $1. That's crazy. Nonconformity. All right. There's lots of comedic elements in this play as you're reading it. Lots of funny things. John says a bad word. What the H? He's been to Harvard. Okay. And then Mom gets on to him. John, don't ever say that. And he's like, say what? Say Harvard? Ha ha ha. And it's supposed to be a funny moment. Obviously, a little misunderstanding. We also see in this section on page 7, Thoreau talking to John, and you note that Thoreau and John have a very close relationship. If anybody understands Thoreau, it's his brother John. And you'll see that coming back from Harvard, he said, I learned more from one man than anybody else in Harvard, than all my professors. Who was that? Well, Ralph Waldo Emerson, of course. So they're all very much tied together. So there's a whole dialogue on pages, on page 8 about the universal mind and kind of Thoreau's idea of God and human deity and things like that. Then you go into page 9. And this is back to Ralph Waldo Emerson talking to his wife, and it's like, you had a great lecture, people were sleeping through it, so you get the idea that he's a very public feature. On page 10, then you actually have Thoreau talking to Bailey, who is the other prisoner there. He wakes him up because he's snoring and it's bothering Thoreau, and then he hears a bird, and then so they have this whole discussion about nature and how it's so amazing, and it contains all these secrets and revelation, which is a very transcendentalist idea. So they have this whole discussion. We find that Bailey's not very educated. He doesn't really know what's going on in the world. And these pages are really just letting us know about Bailey. Through page 12, we find out Bailey's here because he is accused of burning a barn, and so for 3 months they've kept him in prison or in jail, not allowing him to have a trial yet. And he says, I'm innocent, I didn't do it. I fell asleep in that barn, and embers from my pipe must have caught it on fire, which means that he did do it, he just didn't do it intentionally. Anyway, he and Thoreau make fast friends. There are a lot of comedic elements here also. For example, they're talking about the bird, and he said, did you ever make friends with a loon? And Bailey says, not till tonight. In other words, Thoreau, you're crazy, and calling him a loon. So, supposed to be funny. We also see this theme of nonconformity continue to come out. Bailey says, I don't want you to say anything to anybody, because Thoreau's upset that Bailey's had to be here for 3 months waiting for his trial. So he's going to call the bailiff, and Bailey says, no, I don't want to do anything. I just want to sit here. I want to make a little money. I just want to get along. And those words, get along, they're going to continue to come up, and they're going to grind more and more and more on Thoreau, Henry, in the play. And that brings us to the bottom of 13, important passage where he says, I know where he's going to be. He's going to be where he's supposed to be, talking about some guy walking outside. So he can be where he's supposed to be at the time he's supposed to be there. Remember, conformity, right? Why? So he'll be liked. He says there's a whole country of us who only just want to be liked. But to be liked, you must never disagree. And if you disagree, it's like only breathing in and never breathing out. A man can suffocate in courtesy. And we're going to see him kind of grow in those feelings. Okay. So in the next couple of pages, he teaches Bailey to write his name. Says you make that really simple. The last scene in this section of reading then is Thoreau teaching school back when he actually was a teacher. So things that happen in the jail cell prompt memories for Thoreau. So he's being a teacher to Bailey, and that makes him remember the time when he actually was a teacher. And so then we flash on page 16 to the schoolroom. He's teaching class, and an overseer comes in, wants to know, he keeps interrupting. Why aren't you using textbooks? What are you teaching him? A kid asks a question about God. How dare you answer him? Why are you talking to him about that? Well, Thoreau makes a fool of the schoolmaster, and the whole class laughs. And so that, of course, makes the schoolmaster mad because the kids are laughing at him. And so he says, basically, you need to get control of your students. And on page 20, all Henry has to do is wave his hand, and the entire class is silent. That is control. So Thoreau has control of his class. The problem is he's not controlling it in the way that the schoolmaster wants him to. Well, he says, forgive me. He's willing to apologize so that he can retain his position, not because he necessarily wants his position for himself, but because he wants to be able to be there for the kids, which is pretty noble. except for the overseer wants payback. These kids laughed at me. They must be punished. Okay, well, I'll lecture him, Thoreau says. And he says, no, that's not good enough. You must flog them. In other words, spank them. This is that question of corporal punishment. And Thoreau says, I'm not going to do that. I don't believe in it. Well, finally, he wears down. And this is a weird way they do it in the play. He pulls out a chair and he whips a chair. And he says a boy's name and then he whips a chair. He does it 6 times. On stage, we're supposed to realize that that chair is actually a boy. Okay, remember, it's a sparse minimalist play. They're using a chair, but we're supposed to pretend it's actually a boy because that's what happened. Well, you would think, okay, he did what he was supposed to, all is well. As soon as he does that, he quits. He says, I'm done. You can go back and tell him I did what you told me to do. I'm not going to be a teacher for you anymore. And he quits. Why? Because he broke his own rules. He didn't believe in corporal punishment, but he allowed himself to be persuaded to whip 6 children. And so he's so disgusted with what he's done, he walks away. I'm done. Now, another parallel with Ralph Waldo Emerson, because right on page 23, whenever Henry David Thoreau quits teaching, he says, I've done what you told me to do, can't do it anymore, I quit. So Ralph Waldo Emerson is quitting preaching. He was a pastor of a church and he couldn't give out or administer the sacraments. And so he says, I don't believe in this, I quit. So notice the parallels between Waldo and Henry throughout the play. That brings you to the first section of your reading for the night Thoreau spent in jail. I hope you enjoy.